Chapter 21. P.L. spent the day sleeping. After he walked out on Quickening and the others of the little company from Rambling Steep, he went directly to a building less than a block away that he had chosen for himself 2 days earlier. Rounding the corner of the building so that he was out of sight of anyone who might be watching, he entered through a side door, climbed the stairs 1 floor, followed the hallways to the front of the building, and turned into a large, well-littered chamber with windows that ran almost floor to ceiling and opened on the street below, and the buildings across, one of which was where his once companions were presently hiding. He permitted himself a brief smile. They were such a pack of fools. P.L. had a plan. He believed, as Quickening did, that the Stone King was hidden somewhere in the city. He did not believe the others of the company would find him, even if they searched from now until next summer. He alone could do so. P.L. was a hunter by instinct and experience. The others were something less, each to a varying degree, but all hopeless. He had not lied when he told them he would be better off on his own. He would. Hornadese was a tracker, but a tracker's skills were useless in a city of stone. Karisman and Morgan Lee had no skills worth talking about. Quickening disdained the use of her magic, maybe with good reason, although he wasn't convinced of that yet. The only one who might have been useful to him was Walker Bow, but the man with one arm was his most dangerous enemy, and he did not want to have that worry about watching his back. His plan was simple. The key to finding Earl Belk was the rake. The creeper was the Stone King's house pet, a giant watchdog that kept the city free of intruders. He turned it loose at night, and it swept the streets and buildings clean. What it missed one night, it went after the next, but only at night, not during the day. Why was that? P.L. asked himself. And the answer was obvious, because like everything else that served the Stone King, willingly or not, it could not see. It hunted by using its other senses. The night was its natural ally. Daylight might even hinder it. Where did it go during the day? P.L. then asked. Again, the answer seemed obvious. Like any house pet, it went back to its master. That meant that if P.L. could manage to follow the rake to its daytime lair, he had a good chance of finding the Stone King. P.L. thought he could do so. The night was his ally as well. He had done most of his hunting in the dark. His own senses were as sharp as those of the creeper. He could hunt the rake as easily as the rake could hunt him. The rake was a monster. There was no point in thinking he stood a chance against such a beast in a face-to-face confrontation, even with the aid of the stealth. But P.L. could be a shadow when he chose, and nothing could bring him to bay. He would take his chances. He would play cat and mouse with the rake. P.L. was feeling many things, but fear wasn't one of them. He had a healthy respect for the creeper, but he was not frightened of it. After all, he was the smarter of the two. Come nightfall, he would prove it. So he slept the daylight hours away, stretched out of sight just beneath the windows, where he could feel the faint, hazy sunlight on his face and hear the sounds of anyone or anything passing in the street below. When it grew dark, the shadows cooling the air to a damp chill, the light fading away, he rose and slipped down the stairs and out of the door. He stood listening in the gloom for a long time. He had not heard the others of the company return from their daytime hunt. That was odd. Perhaps they had come into their shelter through another door. But he thought he would have heard them nevertheless. For a moment he considered stealing in for a quick look, but abandoned the idea almost immediately. What happened to them had nothing to do with him. Even Quickening no longer mattered as much. Now that he was away from her, he discovered she had lost something of her hold over him. She was just a girl he had been sent to kill. And kill her he would, if she was still alive, when he returned from the night's hunt. He would kill them all. The cries of the seabirds were distant and mournful in the evening stillness, faint whimpers carried on the sea wind. He could hear the dull pounding of the waters of the Titterus, against Eldwith's shores and the low rumble of the Morgrint somewhere deep beneath the city. He could not hear the creeper. He waited until it was as black as it would get, the skies obscured by clouds and mist. The gloom settled down about the building, spinning shadow webs. He had listened to and identified all of the dark sounds by then. They were as familiar as the beating of his pulse. He began to move, just another shadow in the night. He slipped down the streets in quick, cautious dartings that carried him from one pool of darkness to the next. He did not carry any weapon, but the stealth, and the stealth was safely sheathed within the covering of his pants. The only weapons he needed right now were instinct and stealth. He found a juncture of streets where he could crouch and wait within a deeply shadowed entry that opened out of a tunnel. Stairwell gave him a clear view of everything for almost 2 blocks. He settled himself back against the stone centre post and waited. Almost immediately, he began thinking of the girl, Quickening, the daughter of the King of the Silver River. She was a maddening puzzle who stirred such conflicting feelings within him that he could barely begin to sort them out. It would have been better simply to brush them all aside and do as Rimadol had said he must. Kill her. Yet he could not bring himself to do so. It was more than defiance of Dol and his continued attempts to subvert him to the shadowing cause, more than his determination that he would handle matters in his own way. It was a doubt and hesitation she roused in him, the feeling that somehow he wasn't as much in control of matters as he believed, that she knew about things about him, secrets. She was a harbour of so many. If he killed her, those secrets would be lost forever. He pictured her in his mind as he had done so many nights during their journey north. He could visualize the perfection of her features. The way the light's movement across her face and body made every aspect seem more stunning than the one before. He could hear the music in her voice. He could feel her touch. She was real and impossible at once, and elemental by her own admission, a thing made of magic, yet human as well. Pierre was a man whose respect for life had long since been deadened by his killings. He was a professional assassin who had never failed. He did not understand losing. He was a wall that could not be breached. He was unapproachable by others, save for those brief moments he chose to tolerate their presence. But Quickening, the strange, ethereal girl, threatened all of that. She had it in her, he believed, to ruin everything he was and in the end destroy him. He didn't know how, but he believed it was so. She had the power to undo him. He should have been anxious to kill her then, to do as Rimadol had asked. Instead, he was intrigued. He had never encountered anyone until now who felt might threaten him. He wanted to rid himself of that threat, yet he wanted to get close to it first. He stared out into the streets of Eldwith, down the corridors between the silent, towering buildings and into the tunnels of endless gloom. Unbothered by the seeming contradiction, and at once the shadows reached out to him and drew him close. He was as much at home here as he had been at Southwatch, a part of the night, the emptiness, the solitude, the presence of death and absence of life. How little difference was there, he marvelled, between the kingdoms of Earl Belk and the Shadowin. He relaxed. He belonged in the anonymity of darkness. If she and those who stayed with her that required the light, he thought of them momentarily. It was a way to pass the time. He pictured each as he had pictured Quickening and considered the potential of each as a threat to him. Charisman, he dismissed the tunesmith almost immediately. Hornady, what was it about that old man that bothered him so? He hated the way the bearish tracker looked at him, as if seeing right through skin and bone. He reflected on it momentarily, then shrugged it away. Dees was used up. He wielded no magic. Morgan Lee, he disliked the Highlander because he was so obviously Quickening's favourite. She might even love him in her own way, although he doubted she was capable of real feeling. Not her, not the elemental daughter of the king of the Silver River. She was simply using him as she was using them all. Her reasons, her own, carefully concealed. The Highlander was young and rash and probably would find a way to kill himself before he became a real problem. That left Walkabout. As always, PL took an extra measure of time to ponder him. Walkabout was an enigma. He had magic, but he didn't seem comfortable using it. Quickening had practically raised him from the dead, yet he seemed almost uninterested in living. He was preoccupied with matters of his own, things that he kept hidden deep down inside, secrets as puzzling as those of the girl. Walkabout had a sense of things that surprised Pierre. He might even be prescient. Once, some years ago, Pierre had heard of a man who lived in the Eastland and could commune with animals and read the changes in the lands before they came to pass. This man, perhaps. He was said to be a formidable opponent. The gnomes were terrified of him. Pierre rocked forward slowly and clasped his hands together. He would have to be especially careful of one arm. He knew. Pierre wasn't frightened of Walkabout, but neither was Walkabout frightened of him. Yet. The minutes drifted away, the night deepened, and the street remained empty and still. Pierre waited patiently, knowing the rake would eventually come as it had come each night, searching for their hiding place, seeking them out and determined to exterminate them as they had been trained to do so. Tonight would be no exception. He let himself consider for a time the implications of having possession of a magic like the Black Elfstone, a magic that could negate all other magics. Once he had it in his grasp, as he eventually would, what would he do with it? His narrow, sharp features crinkled with amusement. He would use it against Rimadal, for starters. He would use it to negate Dahl's own magic. He would slip into Southwatch, find the first seeker, and put an end to him. Rimadal had grown more annoying than useful. Pierre no longer cared to tolerate him. It was time to sever their partnership once and for all. After that, he might use the talisman against the rest of the Shadow and perhaps make himself their leader. Except that he really didn't want anything to do with them. Better perhaps simply to eliminate them all, or as many as he could reach. He smiled expectantly. That would be an interesting challenge. He leaned back contentedly in the shadows of his shelter. He would have to learn how to use the magic of the Elfstone first, of course. Would that prove difficult? Would he have to rely on quickening to instruct him? Or would he have to find a way to keep her alive as well along? He shivered with anticipation. The solution would present itself when it was time. For now, he must concentrate on gaining possession of the Elfstone. Almost an hour passed before he finally heard the approach of the rake. The creeper came from the east, its middle leg scraping softly on the stone as it slipped through the gloom. It came right toward Pierre. The assassin melted back into the darkness of the stairwell until his eyes were level with the street. The creature looked enormous from this angle. Its immense body balanced on iron-encased legs, its whip-like tail curled and ready, and its tentacles outstretched and sweeping from the damp air like feelers. Steam rose from its iron shell, the heat of its body reacting to the cool air, condensation forming and dripping onto the street. It sent its tentacles snaking into doorways and windows, along the gutters below the walkways, down the sewers, and into the wrecks of the ancient skeletons of the toppled stone carriages. For an instant, Pierre thought the beast would spy him out, but then something caught the creeper's attention, and it scuttled past, disappeared into the night. Pierre waited until he could just barely hear it, then slipped from his hiding place in pursuit. He tracked the rake for the remainder of the night, down streets and alleyways, through the foyers and halls of massive old buildings, and along the edges of the cliffs that bounded the city west and north. The creeper went everywhere, a beast at hunt, constantly on the move. Pierre stalked it relentlessly. making sure he could hear it, not see it. He had to be very sure he did not get too close. If he did, the creature would sense his presence and come after him. Pierre made himself a part of the shadows, just another piece of an endless stone landscape, a thing of vapour and non-being that not even the rake could detect. He kept on the walkways and close to the buildings below, avoiding the streets and their maze of trapdoors, and stayed clear of any opening spaces. He did not hurry. He kept his pace steady. Playing cat and mouse required a careful exercise of patience. And then suddenly, near dawn, the rake disappeared. He had glimpsed it only minutes earlier as it skidded away down a street in the central section of the city, rather close to where the others of the company were hiding. He could hear its leg and tentacle scrape, its body turn, and then there was nothing. Silence. Pierre slowed, stopped, and listened. Still, there was nothing. He moved ahead cautiously, following a narrow alleyway until it emerged into a street. Still concealed within the shadows of the alleyway, he peered out. Left, the street tunneled into the gloom past rows of buildings that stretched skyward, flat-faced and unrevealing. Right, the street was bisected by a cross street and bracketed by two twin towers with huge shadowed foyers that disappeared into complete blackness. Pierre searched the street both ways, listened again, and began to fume. How could he have lost it so suddenly? How could it have just disappeared? He was aware again of a brightening of the air, a hint of the sun's pending emergence into the world beyond. The clouds and mist and gloom of Eldris. It was daybreak. The rake would go into hiding now. Perhaps it already had. Pierre frowned, then scanned the impenetrable shadows of the buildings across the way. Was that its hiding place, he wondered. He started from his own concealment for a look, when that sixth sense he relied upon so heavily warned him what was happening. The rake was in hiding all night, but not for the reason he had first imagined. It was in hiding because it was setting a trap. It knew that intruders were still loose in the city, somewhere close. It knew they would have to kill it, or it would have to kill them. So on the chance that they followed, it had set a trap. It was waiting now to see if anything fell into it. Pierre felt a rush of cold determination surge through him as he shrank back into the gloom of the alleyway. Cat and mouse. That's all it was. He smiled and waited. Long minutes passed and there was only silence. Pierre continued to wait. Then abruptly, the rake emerged from the shadows of the buildings across the street to the left, dancing almost gracefully into view. Body poised, Pierre held his breath as the monster tested the air, turning slowly about. Satisfied, it moved on. Pierre exhaled, slowly, and followed. It was growing brighter now, and the night air evolved into a sort of grey haze that reflected the dampness so that it became even more difficult to see what lay ahead. Yet Pierre did not slow, relying on his hearing to warn him of any danger. Always conscious of the sound of the rake moving ahead, it was no longer worrying about pursuit. Its night's work was finished. It was headed home. To the lair of the Stone King, Pierre thought. Impatient for the first time since his hunt had begun, he caught up with the rake as it slowed before a flat-sided building with a shadowed alcove, 30 feet high and twice that across. The rake's feelers probed the stone at the top of the alcove, and a section of the wall within swung silently away, lifting into the gloom. Without a backward glance, the rake slipped through the opening. When it was inside, the wall swung back into place. Got you, Pierre thought fiercely. Nevertheless, he stood where he was for almost an hour afterward, waiting to see if anything else would happen, making certain that this was not another trap. When he was sure that it was safe, he emerged and darted along the edge of the building, following the walkways until he stood before the hidden entry. It took a long time to study it. The stone facing was flat and smooth. He could trace the seams of the opening from within the frame of the alcove, but he could never have noticed the door without. first knowing it was there. Far above him, just visible against the grey of the stone, he could detect a kind of lever. A release, he thought triumphantly. A way in. He stood there for a while longer, thinking. Then he moved away, searching the building across the street for a hiding place. Once safely concealed, he would sit down and figure out a way to trip that lever. Then he would sleep again until it was dark. When night came, he would wake and wait for the rape to go out. When it did, he would go in.